Movie.
Aquí estás, aquí.
No te voy a perder. You fly United one way and I don't even go back, right? Or the other way around. I'm going to introduce you, but I'm going to say like three things. I'll mention you the application. Slipped a little bit. And then let's answer that. And I guess, what do I value? Well, 7 lunches in half. We believe, yeah.
said?
You like Pacific Coast?
No, I'm on the board.
Good. That's great.
I think there's some things that
We love that.
Okay. Hey, amigo, ¿cómo estás? Gusto de verte 2 veces en 2 semanas.
Ya nos conocíamos hace mucho, pero muy bien. ¿Y tú?
Bien, gracias a Dios.
Conocimos a ustedes, su secretario norte, yo estaba con Bruno Ferrari.
Con Bruno, lo sé, me acuerdo perfecto. Bruno. No, bueno, 2005.
No, después estabas en gobernación.
No, pero en América Norte fue 2003, 4, 5. En América Latina. Entonces fue cuando estaba en América Latina.
¿Cómo anda Bruno en este momento? Vi una vez,
Muy bien,
hace
me la puso.
un año, en un avión, un vuelo desde México a Los Ángeles.
Llevamos tiempo en contacto con él. De hecho, le habíamos pedido.
Qué bueno. ¿Qué está haciendo? ¿Recuperando o sigue trabajando?
Sí mandó una carta a lo que le hacía el Salvador. Él mandó una de esas Dear Colleague Letter a favor de la capitalización. O sea, no se apoya. Yo creo que como que le sacó de no subió, exacto. No. ¿Sabes qué? Yo le había dicho, yo no conozco, salvo una persona que directamente a Barnes, que lleva muchísimos años. Yo le había dicho a Juan que hay que escribirle a ver. Fue el primero que llevó a Juan en apellido. Digo, no que yo lo diga. Tocó los escritos, Cirilo, el derecho. Hay que
I didn't say the second name.
porque es muy importante mencionar
What did you think?
¿Quién? Landon, sí. Y con Landon no hablaba mucho, pero
Interesting because the idea of the body, of the platform, what the CEO dialogue was to create that meeting space for the private sector. So sometimes they're protective about not wanting to come in there too much. They want us to be there, and then they make recommendations. It's a balance.
porque de hecho está el
Give that feedback. Well, one idea might be, what, they're meeting how many times a year? Twice a year? It's a challenge. If they met 3 times a year, you could imagine a meeting that could be just devoted to attorney regulation.
Espera y agua. No, también.
We went deep. If we hadn't hired him, we would have. Very impressive.
Yo hasta en salud, en vida,
He's a Renaissance man.
Now, are you traveling a lot around the country?
no lo voy a venir a ver. Es lo que les digo. Si no es hoy porque se acercó el escape y le dijo, oye, pues tiene que venir, te quiere ver. Si no es hoy en la tarde, que no creo,
Casi menos por día.
podemos hacer, o sea, algo de propeto con él. Venir, lo veo en Dallas. Conoces. Yo vi hoy, le decía al senador Rufo, que vi a Corbyn muy bien, o sea, muy enterado, en muy buen tono. Sé que cuando sale de aquí tiene fear, pero lo vi en muy buen tono. Denver, Chilango. Pero llevo mucho tiempo ya digo, a lo largo de los últimos 20 años pues, he estado en temas de frontera 15.
Eso es San Antonio.
A mí me encanta. Es a simple city. O sea, no es obviamente una metrópoli, no es Washington, no es. O sea, te tiene que gustar la vida así. Cuando yo platico con amigos de México, oye, pero San Antonio es un pueblo, ¿sabes? Es un pueblo. Y digo, precisely, porque es muy sencillo. Observa mucho, tiene 1.3 millones. Observa mucho de otra, se está volviendo más como, no tanto como Austin, que Austin obviamente
Por la universidad, ¿no? Básicamente. La cultura de música,
la universidad,
innovación.
exacto, el jazz, es más. Austin es más chico, Austin tiene una población de 700.
San Antonio ahora,
1.3.
que no es nada, no es
También San Antonio está volviendo más cosmopolita. soy un junkie. Están mejorando los museos, hicieron una ópera.
¿Se come bien? ¿Hay comida
Se
buena?
come bien. Y es muy fácil. Es una ciudad muy fácil. Te das tiempo de hacer un día todo lo que quieras. Mucha gente de piedra visita.
Un equipo de la NFL.
Obviamente que estuvieron peleando a los Raiders, pero... Y luego... Creo que sí. Tienen, y ya tiene, bueno, ya tiene, UTSA ya tiene college football. Bears,
Antes de que vayamos, déjame darte
Las escuelas de los niños.
van en escuela pública. Los tres, estoy encantado. Están súper contentos. Es una buena escuela, es un buen distrito, pero es muy buena escuela. Ellos van felices. Tiene el trato, lo es muy bueno. Texas no tiene fama luego de ser tan buena en las escuelas, pero en este distrito está muy bien.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm sorry to interrupt your lunch and your conversations. I hope my voice doesn't give you indigestion. My goodness, you are really, really a good crowd today, I have to say. Once again, welcome to the Wilson Center. Thank you all for being here. It's just as last year, we saw a very big turnout for this event. We're delighted to see the amount of support there in DC and from those who have traveled to DC for an event like this. It's very, very important that we not only talk about the border here in DC, but that we actually have voices from the border. And as I was just explaining to Susanio, one of the most important outcomes of this event every year is that we get people from different parts of the border talking to each other who don't normally talk to each other because geographically they're separated and they're focused on their own little part of the border. One of the most important things about our program is that we try to actually develop a holistic, integral view of the border and trying to work out what the different challenges are across it. I am now going to introduce to you Michael Camuñez, who will interview Geronimo Gutierrez, the head of the North American Development Bank, up here. And please continue to eat. Please don't continue to talk with each other, because that would just be rude. But prepare questions, because Michael will interview Geronimo. But then we're going to leave some time, at least 10 minutes for conversation, for dialogue with the audience. Let me just introduce Michael to you. He is the President and CEO of Manat Jones Global Strategies, former Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Market Access and Compliance with State Department. And most importantly, I would say he is an intellectual leader in the field of U.S.-Mexico relations. And it can be said that he is the intellectual author of the U.S.-Mexico CEO Dialogue, and I think it's terrific to see how that has developed, Michael. Welcome once again to the Wilson Center. It's great to have you back in D.C.
Thanks very much. It's always great to be here, and it's wonderful to be with you all today. Thank you for the invitation, Duncan and Chris, and it's great to see so many old friends. I have the great privilege this afternoon of leading a little dialogue, a little interaction with someone who I think is very well known to all of you and really probably requires very little introduction to this group. But what we want to do is have a little back and forth talking about the North American Development Bank, as well as broader issues that touch on the NCAD Bank's mission and the current state of the U.S.-Mexico border. Geronimo Gutierrez is the president director of the NCAD Bank. He is somebody who has done, I think, in the last 4 years, a superb job. Has, I think, on both sides of the border, is viewed as having brought really tremendous leadership to the NCAD Bank and has done some very innovative things there, which I hope we'll get into. He has a distinguished career himself as former Undersecretary for North America from the Mexican Foreign Ministry, as well as Undersecretary at Gobernación. He has worked as in advisory capacity at Hacienda and in other capacities. We're very pleased to have you, Geronimo. Welcome today.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
So, we've recently come off of what I call the NAFTA mania, celebrating 20 years of NAFTA, and of course, everyone talks about the great accomplishments that NAFTA has brought to both countries, which I think are well credited and well deserved. But sometimes we forget about what else NAFTA brought, which was the introduction of the North American Development Bank. So as we look back on 20 years, give us your take, just to set the stage for the NCAD Bank. How has the U.S.-Mexico border itself changed in the last 20 years, and how has that affected the mission and work of the NCAD Bank?
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you to everybody for being here. Let me also thank everybody at the Woodrow Wilson team for having the bank and myself here. And it's always a pleasure to work with the Woodrow Wilson, Tongan. One of the good things about the NCAD Bank is that it's truly a binational team. So I want to recognize here the presence of my friend and colleague, Alex Hinojosa. As you know, the NCAD Bank is headed by really two people in a way, one from Mexico and one from the U.S. And Alex is here with us also. And let me tell you that this bar stool format is very comfortable. I mean, it's much better, especially for the occasion. It's like, I'm going to call it the old bar stool format. I think we'll try to make it as agile as possible. Two quick things. 20 years, yes. The NCAD Bank was created as a result of NAFTA, in the context of NAFTA. I think that the bank has gone through in my view, it's gone through three phases. The first one was especially as a binational institution, which we're really one of the few fully, truly binational institutions that exist, and I think that's very important in itself. Three phases. One was what I call the what do we do next phase. I mean, after NAFTA was signed, suddenly you have a bank and the commission, the Board of Environmental Cooperation Commission, that nobody really wanted. We were created as an accident. That's the truth. I mean, being very blunt, it was used to get NAFTA through. So neither the U.S. or the Mexican governments were really, very convinced that it would work or that they really wanted to make it work. And that phase took some time. Okay, we now have a bank, a binational institution that does infrastructure on the border. What does that mean, and what do we do? So that took some time. Then a phase which was institutional, strengthening, consolidation, which was, after you have offices, policies in place, really you begin to, do what you are, a bank. And that, there was a reform in 2004 of the charters that was, approved here in Congress and in Mexico that changed a lot of things because nobody really had a blueprint about how to create a binational institution that works in a very specific area, it's 100 kilometers at that time, north and south, and that does only environmental infrastructure. And that that has gone through. That's the second phase. And the third phase is what I think, I'm gladly enough, I benefit from the work of my predecessors in the sense that you're at a phase where you can really begin to grow. And that's, I think, where we are. We work on 4 areas that are important for the border. Water, it's a huge, important topic. I sometimes a bit dramatically, but I think it does reflect part of the reality,
15 years from now, it's not going to be immigration and it's not going to be security, what is every day on the U.S. bilateral, perspective and agenda. It's going to be water. It's going to be it is already worldwide hugely. And the bank and the commission don't have, just to be sure, we're not a solution for all. The challenge is huge in terms of managing better the joint, all of our joint basins and doing a better job in managing water in general in the border. But we're an important component, and I think we will continue to be. We have worked recently a lot on renewable and clean energy, and that has been, I would say, largely successful. In the past 4 or 5 years, we've financed around $700 million on renewable energy projects, both in the U.S. and Mexico, which is important. And we continue to be on air quality projects, which is everything that helps urban mobility, to improve urban mobility and therefore the air quality along the different border cities, and solid waste. Now, the border has gone through 3 phases, talking a bit about how over these 20 years, we just had our 20th birthday at the bank, obviously last year also, and we celebrated. No? The first is that it was all about trade. After NAFTA, the border was very, at the time that everybody was talking about the end of history and the like, there was a very optimistic view, so we're going to finish and bring down the borders everywhere, no? That changed radically with 9/11 for very good reasons, and it was all about security. And now I think we're moving at a phase where it's about joint production and about a region. And in that context, the bank naturally plays a very important role, because we cover what is obviously a very important part of that region.
So, picking up on that theme, you started your comments by recognizing that Nedbank was created as a necessary compromise to help facilitate and grease the wheels to get NAFTA passed in both countries, obviously with a strong environmental focus. And the bank's mandate to date has largely focused on projects that have an environmental component. Is it time for that mandate to be broadened? I know that you have been undertaking, for example, clean energy, which we'll talk about some more in a moment. But you're undertaking projects that are, some might say, stretching the limits of the mandate to still within its 4 corners, but to the outer edge of what the bank was originally envisioned to do. What is that environmental focus a limitation? Is there a need for a revision to the bank's charter and mandate? How do you see those issues?
First of all, since I care about job security and 2 board members are here, I'll be very careful in what I say. They are, in fact, my boss, Sue Sarnio from the State Department of Western Hemisphere, so everything I say, I must be accountable, and Denise Duchesne from California, who's also here. But the short answer is no. I don't think, and my view has changed over the years. I have to be intellectually honest. And let me explain what yes and what no, okay? First of all, at least in Mexico, the Nedbank was always seen as the European component of NAFTA. This bank that will help bring about equalization, social development equalization as a result of NAFTA. And we actually had a fund, or have a fund, the domestic program that was, a very small program, was $40 or $50 million, which was really symbolic, in terms of really equalization. And they're still, those funds are still somewhere there in the accountable in the bank, but we never really had control of those funds that were specifically destined to help equalize development, and those areas especially that were going to hit by trade. No? But in Mexico, it was always, and to some extent is still seen as a way to, the European Union had cohesion funds, so let's use this bank throughout Mexico and throughout the United States to help. This is a border bank, and it should continue to be a border bank. That's the first. When people think about the mandate, they think about also juridic, geographical jurisdiction. There is so much to do at the border that the debate is a bit, obnoxious. It's perfectly correct, and I think that I share the view from my colleagues at the bank, and I think the board. It should continue to be a border bank, not a whole region bank. That's number one. And number two, in terms of the areas to cover, what type of projects do we do? I think we're right on spot about the things that we should be doing, because it's really about infrastructure. We're not competing with other institutions either in Mexico. We're nothing. Lending to just enterprises and businesses, because there are institutions in Mexico and the U.S. commercial banks that can do that. It wouldn't make sense. No. Other areas, schools, no, we really don't do that. We don't. Those are some of the areas that have been discussed as having the bank finance. They are within what we do. There's a lot of need of water infrastructure in all of the border, and that will continue to be present. So, I mean, there's plenty of to do.
Let's drill down on that. Last week at the U.S.-Mexico CEO dialogue, Secretary Pritzker was talking to the CEOs about her experience engaging with this Matamoros railway bypass project, and how challenging it has been for her to see and to try to drive the fulfillment of this first, infamous first cross-border rail in 100 years since the Mexican Revolution. And she was saying to the CEOs that neither government is particularly well suited at doing this kind of project management of big-scale infrastructure projects that have a cross-border dimension. Today, we've heard a morning full of discussion about the critical need for new infrastructure in the border and updating and modernizing the physical infrastructure to facilitate trade along the border. It seems, given the binational nature of the NCAD Bank, that is a role that the NCAD Bank can and perhaps should be playing. Is that something that could fall within the existing mandate of the bank?
It actually does already. We have we have already an experience financing and helping develop one point of entry through the border. That is definitely an area that falls within our mandate right now, and that's why I think if you take into account water, energy, solid waste, I mean, there's so much.
What about just core transportation?
We can do. I think there's, first of all, points of entry. Yes, we should. We're very good. We could be a very, very good tool in helping develop and putting together the financial structure of a point of entry project. Now, having said that, it's very, and we're trying to do that, and it's difficult. You have to take into account two things. The first one is every community wants a point of entry. If you go along the border, everybody wants its own point of entry, and obviously there's not all of them are financially feasible, and not all of them can be built, even if there was unlimited resources, or none of them should be built. So the fact that we need, the governments, we're a tool of the governments to help, once you have a project, help us structure the permitting, the environmental aspects, and including the financial structure that will eventually help finance the project, including non-reversible resources from GSA or from the Mexican federal government, but also trying to use other financial structure, debt, if there's a cash flow to be captured, to help develop that. That's an area that we certainly, and I believe that we should work. And to the extent that it expedites the flow of goods and people and the like at the border, the environment is very well served, because the lines do create serious health and contamination hazards along the border. And that has been proven by different studies, not even done by us, but all sorts of institutions.
Do you think then this new U.S.-Mexico high-level economic dialogue, which I was a part of helping to establish, is now the primary platform by which the executive leadership at the cabinet level between the two governments is discussing strategic priorities? Do you think that the HLED has given sufficient attention to the North American Development Bank? And if not, do you think there's a need? We have your so-called boss from the State Department is here. Is there a need to elevate the profile and the stature of the NCAD Bank within this new bilateral framework?
I think there is a need. I think it has, over the years, it has evolved. The profile has evolved favorably. Someone very famous from the state used to call not the Nedbank, the Nada Bank, because we were doing nada, no? and it was, it was the way it was a U.S. president. And I think that, to be objective, I think the bank over the years has gained a higher profile. We are now issuing in the markets. We just did our first issue in Switzerland. We come often here. We're more in the mind of the right stakeholders, players and shakers on both sides of the border. But it's still a work to be done, so we cannot be satisfied with where we are. I think that the high-level economic dialogue is a very good framework. Within that framework, we have been assigned, we were mentioned. No, that's good. I think it was the first mention that we were, the first time the bank was mentioned by the presidents, or the second in history probably was that time. No, so that's good. And they also committed and asked us to do a study on points of entry that we will be hopefully presenting here in the next couple of months, using the Institute as venue, we have talked, which talks about points of entry, but very specifically, is not what the commissioner talked today, what Jose Martin here talked about. An important part of the flow problem is going to be solved by pre-clearance and all the things that were discussed already, by actions, programs, not by new infrastructure. But in the future, there's going to be a need for more points of entry in the next, if not 5, in the next 10, 20, 15 years. And the way both governments, and here I'm going to be blunt, the way both governments identify, design, plan, and build points of entry is terrible. It's terrible, no? And it can improve, no? And it's not an easy task. I'm not saying, and it has improved a lot. So this study is going to be geared toward making certain recommendations specifically. So as new infrastructure gets built, it doesn't mean that it's not choosing what infrastructure is going to be built or it's. Everybody would agree that in the next 20 years, new points of entry are going to have to be built. Where that's still a debate to take place. Okay, how do we build it? How do you plan it? And Jose Martin, and I have to quote him again because I'm very happy that you're anticipating. It shouldn't be 2 different projects. We do have still instances where we have bridges going to nowhere. No, it has happened. Throughout the history of points of entry, it has happened. No? And that's very regrettable. So the idea is, let's make one project that is truly binational, bid out ideally to firms, construction firms on both sides of the border, with one joint management of the construction and implementation of the project. That doesn't have to do with the authority once the project, it's a turnkey project. Once the infrastructure is finished, it gets turned to the proper authorities. And there I will make some pitching for the bank. We can be a very good alternative to manage the funds in a sort of an international trust. Yeah. It doesn't, as we do already with EPA funds for projects that are across the border. No, that's a possibility.
Speaking of funds, and in your view, I'm glad to hear that the Nedbank's current mission is broad enough to encompass some of these infrastructure improvement projects. But of course, resources is always a challenge. The bank, the governments have recently announced their support. Maybe the 3rd time the president's mentioned the banks. Yep. Might have been in their commitment to recapitalize the banks. But of course, that takes congressional approval and appropriations. It's what, $3 billion on each side? Yes. So if I made you uncomfortable talking about the mission of the bank, let me make you more uncomfortable by talking about domestic politics. We've seen what has happened with the Trade Promotion Authority and trade issues generally in our Congress, and the controversy that they've ensued. And when NAFTA is raised in the trade context, it's still, regrettably, despite the success, the overwhelming success, is still viewed among many partisans as costing American jobs and as a controversial thing that many, especially Democrats, shoo away from. So what is the strategy by which we can get the American Congress to approve this capital increase, and how do you avoid some of the pitfalls that are typically associated with the baggage that NAFTA carries with it politically. We heard from Senator Cornyn today, who acknowledged that he could use a refresher on an update on the bank, and that's coming from a border senator who's a huge champion of the Mexico relationship. So what does that portend for the strategy for getting more capital approved?
That's a very good question. Let me talk briefly about two strategic things that are going on with the bank and the commission. We always forget the Border Environmental Cooperation Commission, and I'll start with the first one. After 20 years, and I'm very glad, both governments decided finally, or the board members decided to recommend both governments to merge the institutions. We were created separately, and the story's a really good one because the commission was actually created first. It was a way to address the environmental side. So this was going to be only a commission, not a bank, that would do certain projects. And at that time, both the Mexican Secretary of the Treasury and his counterpart, once the commission was created, and this is a true story, actually, well, we have the commission, and they said, yeah, but we're not going to give the money to a bunch of hippies, no? So they created the bank, and that's how the bank was created, no? Because the idea was that the commission will do everything, and we were just there, éramos los cajeros, not just. And that's how we were created. That's why I say it's a. So, and if you see really, if we have an institution that is under the same legal, treaty, the same mandate, that have the same mission, it only made sense to join them, and we're working on that. That's a very important reform. On the capital, we need capital because we're growing. The portfolio is growing at 35% a year, which is very good. I think we're healthy. But if we must continue doing and meeting at least some of the infrastructure needs at the border, we're going to need that capital. Now, very clearly on the political side, going to the question. I think Mexico is, on the Mexican side, there will be, the capital increase will be part of this year's budget that gets presented by the president. I dare to say that there is good support among the Senate and the House in Mexico to support that capital increase, and we shouldn't have any problem. On the U.S. side, it's no secret that there's a skepticism about public development banks in general. They haven't singled us out, but there are four things that are, we need to convince them. There are four things I think that make the case. What's the strategy? The bank is the only multilateral development institution that actually does something in the United States. I don't have nothing against other multilateral development institutions, the IDB, the World Bank, but they don't do stuff in the U.S. So you can say we're doing things in the U.S. that U.S. taxpayers' money is benefiting actually in the United States. That's an important point. The second one is we're really not displacing private banks or private capital. We have we have land, and our financing has been roughly $2 billion since inception. But the projects that were involved, those projects are worth around $7 billion because they brought other private sources of capital. So we leverage capital. We don't displace it. We're increasingly co-financing. Three, we're in areas that infrastructure is generally there's consensus. We're not lending just to everything. We're just very specific, modern environmental infrastructure. And finally, if you look, and to conclude a bit talk about the U.S. relation in general, it's a very important relation. But the bank, it's important. We're still small. But it's a good story about it. It's a good example of U.S.-Mexico cooperation addressing things. There's wonderful examples. So from a political point of view, if there's really interest, and I think there is in the relation on both sides, a way to show that interest and that commitment, say, from a foreign policy perspective, even from a security perspective, it makes sense to continue supporting this institution. I think those are the lines of arguments that should be used here. No?
I think I've got time for two quick questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. Let me just briefly, going back to the mission of the bank, one of the things that we talk about infrastructure and some of the significant public works projects that the bank has been behind, but as a un hijo de la frontera, I was born very close to the border in Las Cruces. One of the things I'm very interested in is the image and the narrative that we heard discussed this morning about the border region itself. And the idea that the border is a place of strength and a place of economic prosperity and a place where innovation happens. What is the role of the bank in funding projects, whether it's clean energy or other initiatives, in showcasing the innovation that's happening in the bank? What are you seeing that's innovative in the region? Because I think part of the challenge politically in procuring more support for the border is not only helping the broader country, I'm speaking now of the United States, understand its dependence on the border in terms of trade throughputs and whatnot, and also understanding the relationship with Mexico as part of our broader economic security. But it's also changing the perception of the border as a place where we need to build, as Donald Trump is saying, a huge, gigantic wall, to a place, not that we should credit anything Donald Trump says, but the fact is, he's out there saying it, and it's getting a lot of tweets and attention. It's still part of this narrative. So what is it that the bank is seeing and can do that can showcase and highlight the innovation and the economic development happening along the border region?
Sorry.
The Donald Trump got you, huh?
Yeah, Donald Trump. Okay. Innovation. Two things. Energy. Thank you. That idea about the wall is...
Es una locura, obviamente.
Okay, so I think, first of all, yes, the border, it's a region in itself. I'm a Chilango, but I've been close to the border for the past 15 years, and it's a place in itself for those who really know it. Economic opportunity at the borders are huge, which I think that's a face that should be shown, not only the security, the legal immigration, no, I mean, the business that goes on every day at the border. Energy is going to be a huge area of opportunity, whether it's on, and there's a lot of efforts already to strengthen cooperation and business on the shale that goes obviously across the border. That's a good opportunity. Renewables, I think that's something that Duncan has written about, and it's not it has huge opportunities because the border has good wind conditions, good irradiation conditions. And actually, just 2 weeks ago, talking about innovation, the first project that produces electricity without a subsidy in Mexico, by the way, any subsidy, it's a wind project, a wind farm that produces electricity in Mexico and sends it and sells it to San Diego Gas and Electric across the border. It's a good example of innovation. And it started operation a week ago. It's probably going to be inaugurated any time in the next couple of months, but it's already working. So energy is an important area. I think that is where, and also, I would come back to water. So water is a huge input for the industry and obviously for people. And I think that talking about the region, there needs to be a coordinated effort to manage water more efficiently jointly in the region. And I think that will help present a different face. Now, let me give you one data. The environment is hugely important. When the bank was created, untreated water flowing from Mexico into the Rio Grande or the Rio Bravo was around all of the water except 20%, only 20% of the water was treated. And that was a concern at that time, and it was a legitimate concern because all that water went into the shared water basins, and that affected everything. Today, thanks to the efforts of the bank, the commission, and other institutions, it's over almost 90% of the water gets treated on the Mexican side going into. So those are good examples that not everybody knows about, and I think that we should show. We have to accept that the bank also needs to be more, perhaps vocal, present, showcasing all these results.
Well, to wrap it up on my end, let me just end with a very open-ended question for you, Geronimo. You're somebody who has been not only a student but a leader
in the bilateral relationship for many years now. From where you sit, both as the head of the bank as well as an important stakeholder in the binational relationship, you've had an opportunity to see across sexenios, across U.S. administrations, the evolution of this relationship. Let me just ask you, from where you sit, what's missing? What is missing in the U.S.-Mexico relationship? If you were, someone talked about a magic wand earlier, if you had the ability to create something new or to create a particular focus on something that isn't given appropriate attention, what would that be in the U.S.-Mexico relationship?
Oh, okay. I think it's difficult to single out one, but I try to mention two, to be honest, on one side and the other. Immigration is not finished. Finishing the way, let me call it, mobility across the borders takes place, in what fashion, what shape, being absolutely careful with, the sovereignty of the United States in defining its own migratory policy, and Mexico, all that. That is still, and a lot of effort has been put over the years by a lot of people. I'm not saying, but it's not done. I think that will hugely, if you go to the border, and I'll tell an anecdote very quickly, but, and this is from Alex and so much, if the border, people at the border really, the border, for their families and people that just cross, see the border as something very, a relative was crossing, and it's a story about a relative crossing the border. And it's an old lady, and it's true, it's a true story. The CBP official stops and in Spanish, obviously, tells this old lady, ¿Qué trae, señora? What happened? Dice, quítate que traigo hambre. No, I'm hungry. And the CBP official said, go ahead. What I'm trying to illustrate is that the dynamics at the border are really so intertwined. And in the border, you see it very clearly, but throughout the countries, that it's very important to finish, I wouldn't say address, because it has been addressed, but finish addressing in a way that it is to everybody feasible. And the other one, and that's my personal view, I think that Mexico has advanced a lot in terms of demythifying the relation with the United States. No, we're not as defensive as we used to. Every so often, you get someone that believes that being defensive or overly defensive with the U.S. is the right way to go, because there's all sorts of conspiracy theories around, and that's, in my experience, that's not true. But one of the things I think there should be is more military cooperation. Military? Yep. I think that's an area that Mexico and the United States should work more. It's difficult. I think there are avenues that have been open lately, but I think that's something that it's often not talked about, but that will end up bringing the two countries closer together.
Muy bien. I think we have time for a couple questions, if I'm not mistaken. Do we have, there's microphones running around, so raise your hand. There's one back here in the corner.
Glafiro Montemayor, AEM Laredo. I agree with you, Geronimo, that everybody, every city wants a POE, but not all of them are very financially feasible. How are you gonna identify those turnkey projects in the border for a POE, for a new POE?
It's a very good question.
The border master plan, it helps you in any way, or?
Very quickly, the border master plans that have been supported by the federal government, especially the U.S. government, and also by the Mexican federal government, are a great input into the process by which the points of entry get decided and identified. And it's a great job, no? That's the truth, and they should continue. But there's also an important thing lacking in those border master plans, which is there are projects that are not in the master plans that probably should be done. And they're not in the master plans, or vice versa. There are a lot of projects that are in the master plans that probably shouldn't be done, at least in the next 15 years. And so how do you decide? I think that's an important part. Now, the other thing, and very quickly, is related to that. No matter what happens in the future, it seems to be very clear that most of the flow will go through 6 or 7 points. O sea, digamos, Baja, toda la parte de Baja California, Los Nogales, Juárez, El Paso, Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, Brownsville, Matamoros. Y espero que no se me vaya uno porque si no voy a insultar a alguien, pero there you have 85, 90% of the flow, and that will continue to be the case just simply because the way that the corridors are built. So the decision needs to be based upon those points that are already there. Are those going to be sufficient, not for the next year, the next 2 years? Are those infrastructure that we have on those great, is going to be sufficient for the next 30 years? The answer is probably no. And then under that notion, how do you begin to plan for the new points of entry? That will be sort of the recommendation.
Well, I'm told we have a hard cutoff, so I apologize that we didn't get more questions in, but I think you can see why so many of us are so impressed with Geronimo's leadership. And Geronimo, I just want to thank you again for your really eloquent articulation of the issues and for being with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Michael, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks again to both of you for being here. Thanks to Manat Jones for supporting the lunch today. We appreciate that. Please, let's all move back over to the auditorium. We actually have a coffee break after this next session, so we're going to have a quick conversation on energy and then have a coffee break.